Hello, everyone. Welcome. Thank you for being here after school on a Tuesday. We really appreciate having you here. As Tom has mentioned, if you have any questions or anything like that, please make sure to just pop it in the chat. And what we'll do is we'll ask Glenda at the end of her presentation, and we can go through a little bit of Q&A from there. But I know that you're not here for us. You're here for the star of the show, who is Glenda. And just a reminder that this will be recorded. So if you wanted to relive the magic or you wanted to share it to some friends and make this go viral, please go for it. So without any further ado, the lady of the moment, Glenda, I'm going to hand it over to you.
Good afternoon and welcome. It's lovely to have the chance to speak to you today about practicals in the new biology syllabus. We know that practicals that work well truly bring biology to life for students, moving them from the memorization of terminology and facts to hands-on doing, thinking, questioning, and working like scientists. So before we begin, I'd like to acknowledge the traditional custodians of the lands that we're meeting on today. I'm on Gadigal land, and I'd also like to acknowledge the traditional custodians of the lands from which each of you joins us. As we share our knowledge of teaching and learning, may I also pay respect to elders both past and present, as it's their knowledge and experience that hold the key to the success of our future generations. In today's workshop, I'm going to cover 4 key areas, as you can see on the slide. We'll start off looking at the different types of scientific investigation presented in the new syllabus, and then we'll look at how these link with the working scientifically skills. And throughout the webinar, I'm going to be addressing the integration of working scientifically skills in line with the new syllabus requirement, remembering that now working scientifically skills have a 60% weighting in the assessment tasks that NESA requires. We're also going to look at models in science, and I've chosen that specifically because in the new Year 11 syllabus, there are 14 content points, syllabus content points that refer to models. And if there's time, I'll briefly chat about AI in biology investigations as well. So we start off by looking at the different types of investigations that appear in the syllabus. By the way, you'll notice me referring to syllabus content points. Those were the old syllabus dot points. They've changed the language. And so you'll hear me referring to those throughout the webinar. The term scientific investigation is a generalized term, and you'll see on the screen that it can be defined as a systematic and structured approach to answering questions, solving problems, and this is done through the collection and analysis of reliable empirical data. In the NESA syllabus, we see all 4 types of investigation listed on the slide mentioned. And of course, this makes us wonder, what's the difference? As an author team, we turn to the NESA support document, and it's one I'd advise you use. It's called Teaching Advice on Scientific Investigations for the Year 11 and 12 syllabus. Now, I know that some of you may already be familiar with the difference from your experience teaching the new junior syllabus, but I'll briefly revisit the difference for the stage 6 syllabus in the next few slides. Firstly, you'll notice that scientific investigations encompass all of the other 3 types of investigation: practical investigations, laboratory experiments, and secondary source investigations. I think we all tend to know that secondary source investigations are different because they rely on processing information about research that other people have done. But we do ask ourselves, what's the difference between a practical investigation and a laboratory experiment? The syllabus content points are quite precise in distinguishing which investigations need to be done when. So if we take a deeper dive into practical investigations first, and then we'll compare them with laboratory experiments, the NESA support document reveals that many investigations fall into the category of practical investigations, and you'll notice right up at the top, laboratory experiments are a type of practical investigation. When the syllabus says practical investigations, it means we as teachers have a choice of laboratory experiments, field work, modeling, even the use of digital technologies like computer simulations. I mentioned field work, and just a point that in the Year 11 syllabus, this is mandatory. You'll see models along there. 14 syllabus content points refer to models, asking students to either use them, create them, compare them. So we'll do a little bit about that later on as well. And we then look at the laboratory experiments. And I think the thing that jumps out is that these are practical investigations that are hands-on and are conducted in a controlled environment, meaning a laboratory or field. Very importantly, NESA specifies that the students must use physical equipment and instruments, either low or high tech, in laboratory investigations. You'll notice they may involve, and they list there quite a few of the working scientific skills. So that's not a must involve, but may involve. So what I did is I've created a slide, which I'll show you in a little while, that compares them. Secondary source, I'm not spending much time on. We know what it is. It involves research. The students gather, analyze, and interpret information. You'll start seeing the working scientifically skills coming through there. And of course, they use a range of sources, literature reviews, data analysis, surveys, interviews, journal articles, etc. If we look then at this slide, and I'm not going to go through it in detail, but if you wanted to take a screenshot, you're welcome to do that. What I've done is I've gone into the support document and created a table comparing the three types of scientific investigations there and what NESA says about them. And I'm going to start in the middle, just looking at the aim, because the aim is different. So firstly, the aim of practical investigations is to get students to collect, process, and analyze data and draw conclusions. Laboratory experiments, as we mentioned, are hands-on, and the main aim there is for students to actually use physical equipment and instruments, low or high tech, to make and record observations. Now, as I'm speaking, you'll probably hear the working scientifically language coming out, and I'll walk you through how to match those to the investigations in a few minutes. In the secondary source investigations, you'll see that students gather, analyze, and interpret data and information. And you'll notice that the use of models crops up again there as an option. Another point of interest is the last row that shows practical investigations may involve, laboratory experiments may involve, but secondary source experiments do involve. So that may involve and do involve language does come through in the NESA syllabus. So I think the important point now is to connect those scientific investigations with the working scientifically skills, and we're going to do a bit of critical thinking and analysis here. So on this slide, I've listed on the left the three types of scientific investigation, and on the right is an infographic with the 7 working scientifically skills. And what we need to do is match the type of investigation with the working scientifically skill. Interestingly, it's not only the type of investigation, but the verbs in the syllabus content point that tell us what action is expected of the students. It tells us whether they need to plan an investigation or plan and conduct that investigation. Are they required to process and analyze information? Do they need a model? Do they need a problem solve? So let's have a look at an example. Straight from the Year 11 syllabus, conduct a laboratory experiment to predict the effect of surface area to volume ratio on the rate of movement of materials into and out of a cell. So I've picked one that we're probably familiar with from the previous syllabus. And when we look at this, we analyze what type of investigation and what are the verbs that jump out at us. The type of investigation, of course, it's a laboratory experiment, so it tells us it's hands-on, and the students must use equipment to measure. The verbs around that tell us that they need to conduct a laboratory experiment and they need to make predictions, predict the effect. And so here we start matching this to the working scientifically skills. And these skills are coded, but the last two digits tell us which skill it is. So the conduct an investigation tells us that it's the skill of conducting scientific investigations. And that's to collect data and information. The predict tells us it's working scientifically, one, questioning and predicting. Now, the interesting thing about this is it means it lends itself to depth studies, because the new syllabus specifies that in any depth study students do, they must address working scientifically skill one, questioning and predicting. So just by analyzing the syllabus content point, we learn quite a bit about how we're going to program for these investigations. So I've got a few examples for you to have a go yourself. One you'll be familiar with, the natural selection investigation. We see it's a practical investigation. So that gives us a choice. It could be a laboratory experiment or another form, for example, a computer simulation. The verbs conduct and model indicate which working scientifically outcomes to target. Conduct being working scientifically 3, you can see the codes in brackets there. And model falls into working scientifically either 4 or 5, depending the way that it's put. 4 is processing information and data, and 5 is analyzing. So that becomes interesting. On the slide, I've got the 4 different types of investigations, so you can see them in context. There's a secondary source investigation, the impact of diabetes on the body's ability to maintain homeostasis. And to link in with the working scientifically skills, we see it's a conduct once again, but this time they're conducting secondary source. And there's an analyze there, analyze the impact. So I've linked it to the working scientifically skills of 3, 5, and 7. 5 is analyze, and 7 is optional because it's communicate. If they're conducting the investigation, you may want them to communicate it by producing a poster or a brochure or an oral presentation to classmates. If we look at the third example, are we coming up third example? There we go. This is conducting a scientific investigation to infer evolutionary relationships between species using DNA and amino acids. The scientific investigation gives us a lot of choice. It can be a practical investigation, it can be secondary source, it can be a laboratory experiment, it can be all 3 if you wanted to. Quite often with the scientific investigations, we combine secondary source research at first, followed by some sort of practical investigation, whether it's a simulation or a laboratory experiment. So that's an interesting one. And then, of course, there's the very specific laboratory experiments. And here the verb tells us that students need to both plan, working scientifically 2, and conduct, working scientifically 3, the experiment. So it means they need to set up independent and dependent variables and demonstrate the effect of enzymes in different environmental conditions. And of course, for that, they will use equipment to conduct the experiment and to measure the results. So as I say, in terms of programming, these are the things to be aware of. Now on this slide, I've got a snip from a page of the new Year 11 textbook. And you'll notice that in this textbook, we've actually integrated the working scientifically outcomes in with the content. Each investigation in the book targets at least one working scientifically outcome or content point, as well as the syllabus content point. There's still a dedicated working scientifically chapter, but instead of it being chapter 1 in the book, that one's online. And we've put the relevant content in context with the content syllabus outcomes. So looking at this example, we explain how to plan the investigation, because the working scientifically skill we're doing here is planning an investigation. And we walk them through setting up dependent and independent variables, justifying those, explaining how reliable data is obtained, assessing potential risks and hazards, and selecting appropriate materials and equipment. And all of this is done in the context of that experiment. So we very closely integrating the working scientifically skills with the content. And then this is followed by the actual investigation, which looks slightly different. And you'll see that a few slides on, under the usual headings of research question, aim, equipment, risk assessment method, etc. So just something a little new, but I also think directly matched to the new syllabus requirements. Now, models in science, I mentioned to you in the last part of the presentation, we look here, that there are 14 syllabus content points just in year 11 on modeling, and they're not all exactly the same. I love the quote. It's normally attributed to Albert Einstein, but there's actually no clear evidence that he actually said it. Regardless of that, I always find it an effective way to highlight the importance for both teachers and students of being able to explain concepts simply, express them clearly, because it actually shows understanding. Student understanding is strengthened when they're asked to use and create models because it forces them to simplify the concept and show their understanding. And so we'll look at quite a few examples of models, and NESA actually specifies that there are different types of models that students could use. NESA's got a very long definition in the glossary of terms of models, and I'm going to read it from my notes so that you can hear, and then we'll break it down. They say it's a mathematical, conceptual, or physical representation, and it describes, simplifies, or clarifies, or provides an explanation of the structure, workings, or relationships within an object, system, or idea. They go on to say that models can provide a means of testing and predicting behavior within limited conditions. So very convoluted definition. But if we actually look at what this means, there are basically different types of models that we use in science for particular purposes. And the first are the physical models, which allow us to visualize. As scientists, we use these to see and touch and manipulate structures. They are often tangible 3D representations of a system or structure. And they may be used to portray things that are too small or too large to see. If we know the purpose of a model, we'll know which one to pick for our students to use. The second are conceptual models. And conceptual models are visual representations of a concept or a process. So interestingly enough, they include diagrams and flowcharts. So when you see model in the syllabus, don't panic. It doesn't have to be a physical model. It could be a diagram, a flowchart, something that promotes the type of student learning where they understand a concept. These are used to organize ideas, map processes, or represent abstract concepts. And they don't require exact physical or mathematical precision, but instead they tend to indicate how components interact. The third type of model that we're familiar with in science are mathematical models. And these quantify things. They tend to be abstract, but they use numbers and symbols and equations. And they are very precise models where calculations are involved. They allow us to make predictions, to test ideas, and to process data or simulate outcomes. Those are the three main ones that NESA mentions. But I will pop in the fact that they say your model may be physical or digital. And digital models, we know students are using all the time. We use them as teachers in the classroom. And these enable us to explore, explain, and predict. They may be simulations, but very often they allow us to manipulate variables and observe changes in real time. So we've included in the textbook the use or creation of a range of models, linked to relevant simulations, digital models, physical models, mathematical models where appropriate. The fifth type of model, modern day model, which is not mentioned in the syllabus, are computational models, but they're approached a little differently. They do speak about analyzing data. And computational models are a combination of mathematical models and computer simulations with a science basis to improve visualization. So they tend to use advanced algorithms and high-level computing to translate those massive data sets or complex numerical results into visible formats like graphs, charts, dashboards. And this type of model allows us to use a computer to analyze or predict the behavior of a system. Computational models that learn patterns from data and improve predictions are called machine learning, we know that. And this is where AI integration comes in. AI integration allows computers to learn patterns from data, adapt to new variables, and then predict outcomes. And these are currently being used in science, particularly in the health sciences, where machine learning is trained on patient data, for example, to predict disease. And there's some computational models that can predict the spread of disease. So I thought since computational models are being used as scientific tools, it's worth introducing our students in one instance in the Year 11 book to a computational model in biology, and I'll give you an example of that. This comes from one of the investigations that we've written, where it's an AI prompted investigation. There's microscope attached to it and that sort of thing, but we actually show our students how to use AI. I do AI investigations only once in the Year 11 book and once in the Year 12 book, because we really believe that teachers will integrate AI into their teaching in line with their own school's protocols and procedures. So we're not prescribing where it needs to be, but just an example in the Year 11 book where we're using AI responsibly and diagnostically. So the first thing is we tell the students to prompt AI to count each phase in mitosis and list the criteria that they use to count. And that's interesting. It comes up with things like, I counted half cells as one, or I didn't count half cells. It tells them how they recognize the phases of mitosis. And then they can go on to ask it to prompt it to explain why, say, interphase is more frequent than other phases. So it's introducing them to some learning from AI, going into the mitotic index, of course. What is the mitotic index? And show me how to calculate it, and AI will do that. And then the individual task, we ask them to do the count and calculate and compare their confidence. What you'll find interesting, and we've done this a couple of times in seminars, is if you ask a group of teachers to use their own school's AI, so Copilot or Gemini or whatever they use, they get different results. Some will say it counted 82 cells in interphase, others go, no, mine said 102. So it shows them that machine learning isn't perfect. And every year that you do it, your own system will get better because you've practiced on it. But it's interesting for students to realize this. We followed up with some development, with some critical thinking questions. So if you look at number 2, we ask them to evaluate the use of AI in the investigation. How did it support your learning rather than replace it? Evaluate whether AI use changed how confident you were in the accuracy of your results. Assess the impact of AI on your understanding. And describe one strategy you used to ensure your work remained your own. So developing that responsible, ethical use of AI, I think is really important. We've always got some extension, so we've differentiated throughout the book. There's support and there's extension. Predict how it might be used in biological research in the future, etc. I've broached AI once in the Year 12 book only, and that's to teach them how to ethically use it. We speak about checking it, cross-checking it against reliable sources, how to reference the use of AI, and if AI has pulled up another website, how to reference your use of AI as well as the website it's pulled up. So just teaching them ethical use, but we will leave it entirely over to the teachers as to when you want to. The big question we ask our students is who's doing the thinking, you or the AI? You need to do the thinking, use AI as your assistant. So just a little bit on AI. So we're really excited about the practical investigations in the new syllabus. There are a lot of them. I will mention, interestingly, that there are no investigations that actually ask for dissections anymore. So you've got the open invitation of a scientific or practical investigation, approach it in the way you choose best, but there's nowhere that specifies dissection or dissection of fresh material or digital. That will be entirely up to you within the new syllabus. So hopefully that's given you a bit of an insight into practicals, and I'm going to hand back to Catherine now.
Amazing. Thank you so much, Glinda. So insightful as always. Do you mind if you can just jump into the next slide for me, please?
Sure.
Thank you, Glinda. As Glinda was saying, we have a whole host of different investigations and different types of investigations as we've just explored in the book as well. And within the book itself, in the print book itself, we've only included the ones that actually have a syllabus content point related to the actual content itself. But that also means that we have some additional investigations available online only as well. So because what we want to do in the book is to make sure that it's just everything that you need as per alignment with the syllabus, but also to give you the freedom and options to actually think about, maybe I could do a different investigation. For example, Glenda, you're saying there might not be dissections anymore, but you could do it if it does fit in the criteria of what the syllabus content point actually asks. And so the ones that we've included in the book, obviously align to that, make them very, very accessible. But as you can also see in that screenshot, we do have the working scientifically skills that we suggest you could develop with your students as part of this particular investigation, and where it makes sense to actually remind and just reteach and resurface the information regarding that particular working scientifically skill, whether that be develop a research question, whether that be picking variables when you're actually developing your research task or your investigation. It's to help and to have it in situ to help the students actually develop that skill, as well as having all of that content online and available. Because as Glenda mentioned at the very start, in terms of assessment and the working scientifically skills, how important it is to develop that, with the 60% of the assessments really made up of the working scientifically skills. And then extending beyond that, thinking about the exam skills as well. A lot of those types of questions and the scenarios are actually really asking the students to demonstrate their scientific thinking by showing their ability to think scientifically using those particular skills. Glenda, if you could please to the next. And before I forget, we do have a digital webinar next week as well. So walking you through some of the things that you've seen here today, but more so the digital resources that you'll have access to, the additional online practicals as well. And so don't forget to sign up if you haven't already. The link, thank you, Tom, is in the chat for you, just in case. And if you're really keen and you'd like to find out more, who should we call, Glenda? What does the next page say? Please do contact any of the learning consultants within your area. They can absolutely provide you more information about the product or any questions that you have. And in answer to your question, Trudy, and probably the question on everyone else's mind, will this be available? Absolutely. Glenda's awesomeness, so you don't have to screenshot, didn't have to screenshot that whole time. So thank you so much. That's at the end of our presentation. But if you have any questions, please, now is the time to ask. And I'm sure, Glenda, you're open to answer anything and everything on anyone's
I
mind.
will try my best.
If not, thank you so much, everybody, for attending. I know it's 5 o'clock. Thank you, Trudy. Thank you, Beck. Thank you, Gillian. And of course, thank you, Glenda,
You're welcome.
for inciting all this wisdom as per usual. Thank you, Nicole. Thank you, everybody. Nikki says you are amazing as always. I bet you get that a lot, Glenda. Thank you. Will the slides be emailed? Yes, they will, Tom. Is that correct? Our book will be available toward a little bit in a few more months, actually, Gail. So sit tight, but we will let you know and we'll continue to communicate with you when that does happen. Thank you, Michaela and Helen and Mitchell and Medwin and Karen. Thank you, Gail. We will absolutely do a chemistry one, Trudy. I don't know if you can tell from that response. I love chemistry. I love biology too, Glenda. Don't you worry. Thanks,
There's a bit of a
Hayden.
bias
Thanks,
there,
Lisa.
Catherine.
Oh, no bias at all. I'm not picking my favorite child. Thank you, Lisa. Thank you, Harriet.
Thanks, everyone. I'm going
Thanks,
to
everyone. Have a
end
great night.
today. Enjoy
Bye.
the rest of your evening.